was a life and death situation.
This was a race against time.
She said, we've got a liver for you. I had a tear or two in my eye.
My adrenaline was going so fast.
I knew that 4 lives were at stake.
They're depending on me solely 100% to get through.
Everything was white except the back of that snowplow.
This is one of the biggest challenges I've ever had, ever in my life.
From the Weather Channel, this is Storm Stories with meteorologist Jim Cantori.
The Rocky Mountain region is no stranger to fickle spring weather. Locals will be out golfing one day and buried in snow the next. But in spring 2009, the region is deluged by an unusually heavy series of storms.
And we are dealing with quite the spring snowstorm through Saturday.
But while skiers flock to the mountains for a fun ride down the slopes, others will put their lives on the line in a spring blizzard with deadly potential.
It became a life-threatening and nearly impossible storm to travel in for southern Wyoming.
Hey, Abby girl.
Chuck and Ruth Forbes moved to northern Wyoming from New England. Married in 1992, they are childhood sweethearts.
Chuck and I'm sure it was the 3rd grade that we met, but it was the 4th grade that he and I were in love.
But for years, Chuck has battled liver disease, a battle he seems to be losing.
I was diagnosed with liver cancer in 2008. That really had me a little worried, to tell you the truth, because I'd always heard that liver cancer was rather fatal.
Chuck's only hope is to get a liver transplant before his cancer spreads.
I didn't think I'd get a liver. I really didn't. I'd kind of resigned to the fact that this is the way it is.
But after more than a year of waiting, on April 4th, 2009, Chuck and Ruth get the call they've been hoping for.
The phone rang 7:30 in the morning, and I picked up the phone, and it was Tracy from the transplant team in Denver.
She said, we've got a liver for you. I turned around, I had a tear or two in my eye, and said to Ruth, you know, we gotta go.
The Forbes have 12 hours to drive 450 miles to Denver in time for the surgery. Any longer, and the liver will not be viable. But what the Forbes don't know, as they head south with hopes that the transplant will save Chuck's life, is that they are heading straight into the biggest blizzard of the season.
Through Thermopolis, just 1 or 2 little snowflakes, nothing that we were afraid to drive through.
After 3 hours of driving, they turn on the radio and hear the weather report.
I heard the weather channel say 25 is closed. You know, I looked at Ruth, and it was like it didn't sink in. So we just kept driving, because I had to get to Denver. There was no ifs, ands, or buts.
With no other way to get to Denver on time for the transplant, the Forbes keep driving.
I think I was in weather denial. We had to get there. All of a sudden, we're at that barrier.
After driving almost 300 miles, the Forbes are forced to stop in Wheatland, Wyoming. The Department of Transportation has closed Interstate 25, and it's the only road leading to Denver. In a panic, Ruth calls Tracy Steinberg, Chuck's transplant coordinator at University of Colorado Hospital.
I've seen those barriers down, and you're not going anywhere. I thought they weren't going to be able to get here, and we'd have to find a local recipient to come in and get this liver.
There's nothing Tracy can do to help. And if the Forbes don't get to Denver, Chuck won't get his transplant. In a panic and out of options, Ruth dials 911.
The girl on the 911 said, "Don't you know we've been forecasting this storm for a week?" And I tried to explain to her without getting hysterical that my husband had to be in Denver.
The 911 operator calls Trooper Chuck Bloom, who is patrolling nearby. In minutes, Trooper Bloom is at the road-closed gate.
They were at their wits' end. They didn't know what they were going to do. Mrs. Forbes was crying. Mr. Forbes is thinking that he's going to die. He's not going to make it. I couldn't let them go. They wouldn't have made it. I couldn't have them follow me. We wouldn't have made it.
There is little that Trooper Bloom can do on his own. But then, Foreman John Benton of the Wyoming Department of Transportation arrives at the scene. Trooper Bloom updates him on the Forbes emergency.
He said, well, we have this fella here that he needs a liver transplant. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. You know, everybody has their own story. And then Chuck said, no, I'm serious. This guy needs to get to Denver ASAP.
They call on the Wyoming Department of Transportation drivers to volunteer to escort the Forbes on the 80-mile journey.
In the space of probably 5 minutes, we had complete teams lined up to do a relay of snowplows from Wheatland to Chugwater, and from Chugwater down to Cheyenne, and from Cheyenne down to the state line to get them into Colorado.
For the first leg of the trip, John calls Rick Schultz, who will escort the Forbes as far as Chugwater on his own. In minutes, Rick is at the gate.
They just raised the gate and waved me on through. It's just, get on down the road. Let's get them through.
It was just relief that finally someone was hearing what we were saying and help was on the way.
But Ruth's relief is premature. Even in a plow truck, Rick will face extremely dangerous driving conditions.
Stranded motorists, blown down signs, accidents, deep snow drifts. The direction the wind was coming from was probably the worst. Kept blowing the snow right back in front of me. As it boils up over the plow, it just kind of hangs there in front of the windshield. And so you can't see for quite a while.
And even with the plow clearing a path, the Forbes are struggling.
I can understand why they did close the road. The storm was that bad. There were 50-mile-an-hour winds, and you couldn't see anywhere.
After more than an hour of driving, they have traveled only 26 miles to Chugwater, Wyoming. The Colorado border is 60 miles away. They're greeted by a welcome sight. Not one, but 5 plows are standing by to take over from Rick.
We were used to following one. To see 5 was pretty awesome.
But in the blowing whiteout, the plows don't dare drive faster than 20 miles an hour. And for Chuck, this is a race against the clock. Even with the plow's help, there's no way the Forbes will make it to Denver on time.
Well, I knew time was really an important thing, and I was afraid that we just wouldn't make it. The thoughts of dying, a lot of things go through your mind. And I asked the good Lord to put things on hold or whatever, you know, I'll be there.
We kept in constant contact with Tracy from the liver transplant unit, and she kept assuring us that we have time, just get here. Not realizing that that 80 miles would take us 5 hours.
The team of plow drivers escort the Forbes to Cheyenne, where a fresh crew takes their place. From there, it is less than 15 miles to the Colorado border. Finally, after more than 10 hours of driving, the Forbes' luck starts to change.
It was almost like the weather knew we were at a border. The snow seemed to just peter right out.
It's a quick drive to University of Colorado Hospital, where the Forbes arrive 3 hours after their deadline. But the surgical team has waited, and the liver is still viable. Chuck can receive the transplant. The surgery is a success.
How are you feeling?
I feel, I know I've been blessed by God.
If you could say something to Chuck Bloom and to those snowplow drivers right now, what do you want to tell them?
I would tell the state trooper that he's underpaid, and I'd tell all them truck drivers to keep up the good work, because that was an example of how important they can be.
After several weeks in the hospital, Chuck Forbes returns to Wyoming. He is expected to make a full recovery. Months later, the Forbes get to personally thank their heroes. For their efforts, Trooper Bloom and the drivers receive the Wyoming Department of Transportation's Larson Award for going above and beyond the call of duty.
The award was created to recognize acts of heroism.
I've known my husband since we were 10 years old, and he was very, very sick. His blue eyes didn't have that twinkle anymore. That snowy day, my sunshine was sick. Thank you. Thank you for getting my husband and I through that snowstorm.
Chuck Forbes' life was saved by the everyday heroism of Trooper Bloom and the plow drivers. But 2 weeks after the blizzard that almost claimed Chuck's life, another storm strikes Colorado. And in a twist of fate, another transplant will hang in the balance.
4 lives were at stake. 3 people were to receive organs, and 1 person was to give her final gift. And that was my priority.
April 17, 2009. After weeks of relentless spring snowstorms, the Denver area is hit with another massive blizzard.
With this particular storm, it started out as rain, and that's a big problem because the rain falls, then the cold air comes in, changes the rain to snow. You have a layer of ice. So not only do you have snow-packed roadways, you have icy and snow-packed roadways. Chains, snow tires, still 4-wheel slide. You know, it's dangerous.
Road crews are overwhelmed by the deluge of snow. And in a bizarre coincidence, another transplant will be affected by the weather. 8 years after the car accident that left her a quadriplegic, 43-year-old Melissa Ekdahl is brought to Vail Medical Center after a sudden heart attack. As her health declines, she expresses her wish to donate her organs. A short time later, she slips into a coma and dies. Her organs will go to patients at the top of the transplant list. One of these patients, Gloria Kugler, has spent years waiting for this life-changing surgery.
4 years ago, I had an infection that turned into a blood sepsis. All my organs shut down. I was put on the transplant list January of 2006, so I was on the list for about 3.5 years.
I think we began to give up a little bit of hope. So when the phone call did come in, we were very excited. And the doctors instructed us to get to University Hospital in Denver as quickly as possible.
But the Kuglers are unaware that the donor has died in Vail Medical Center, 100 miles away. And Interstate 70, the only road to Vail, is buried under feet of snow and ice. At University of Colorado Hospital, Dr. Jeff Campson and the transplant team have no way to get to Vail to recover the organs. Roads are impassable and helicopters are grounded.
You only have a limited amount of time where the organs are viable for transplant.
They call the Colorado State Police and the Department of Transportation, but neither can help, and time is running out.
We weren't sure exactly how we were going to get up there because there was a huge storm.
Then Dr. Campson gets the break he's been hoping for. Respiratory therapist Rick Adams calls the state police to ask permission to drive on the closed highway. He needs to get to his job at a medical center in Frisco, Colorado, between Denver and Vail. And he's confident that his truck, a heavily modified Chevy Suburban, can handle the blizzard.
This truck has never been stopped, not one time. It's a GMC Suburban LS model, 1997, that has a custom 454 motor, bored 30 thousandths over, with a K&N fuel injection kit. It's got an 18-inch variable airbag suspension lift by Firestone. It's got a Pro Comp front suspension lift with torsion bar assembly and axle trusses. It's better than a tank. I described to them the type of vehicle that I build and operate, and when they said, if that's your daily driver, we need you to contact University Hospital.
Rick volunteers to drive Dr. Campson to Vail so he can recover the organs.
I said, I'll be there in 30 minutes, have the doctors waiting outside the emergency room for me and tell them to expect the biggest, blackest truck they've ever seen.
On the road to the hospital, Rick passes cars snowed in on the highway.
As soon as I got to the University Hospital, Dr. Campson was at the ER bay door waiting for me with his bag. And I told him straight up right then that the conditions were dangerous and I wanted him to know just how bad it was outside.
They will have to drive through 100 miles of mountain passes with steep cliff drop-offs and possible avalanches. If they have trouble, there will be no hope of quick rescue.
I don't know much about trucks, but it looked like a truck that could handle it. We came to a deal that if we thought that at any point that it was too dangerous, we would just stop.
They start driving. Under normal conditions, the scenic drive to Vail is less than 2 hours. Tonight, it will take more than 6.
Once we got basically into the mountains, the roads were gone. There weren't cars anywhere. The big pines were just covered in a blanket of snow.
High winds blow the dry, powdery snow, creating a whiteout, dangerous in any circumstance, even more so with sheer cliffs lining the roadway.
Anybody that's driven up to the mountains in Colorado knows that there's parts of I-70 that are right on the edge of the mountain. Some of the passes, you could actually look out over the cliff, and that would be a little intimidating.
And as Rick drives further into the mountains, the roads are only more challenging.
The car would fishtail back and forth.
I had to keep my speed up while crashing through blocks of ice and blocks of snow that were the size of motorcycles and small vehicles, tires. I mean, it was just incredible, the stuff that was falling off the mountain. The steering wheel was fighting me so hard. I was white-knuckled the entire time. The truck was sliding everywhere. Freeway conditions had become so bad, snow was actually coming up over top of the hood of the truck and blinding us.
Suddenly, they hit a patch of ice, careening the truck into a 10-foot snowbank.
We literally submarined the Suburban into that snowbank. You couldn't see out any window of the Suburban because the snow was so deep. Dr. Jeff Campson was extremely startled for obvious reasons and asked if everything was okay, and I wasn't sure everything was okay, and I told him that I didn't think that we were going to be able to continue any further up the mountain. I thought for sure that we were stuck. Colorado State Patrol had let us know before this trip started that we were on our own. Rescue would not be imminent. We knew from the get-go that we were alone and on our own. I just wasn't sure if we were going to be able to get out of the ditch anytime soon.
April 17, 2009. Rick Adams and Dr. Jeff Campson are en route to Vail, driving through a blizzard to recover organs for patients in Denver. They've just crashed into a snowbank, and help is not on the way. With no hope of rescue, it's up to Rick to get them out of the ditch and back on the road.
If we were going to get out, I was either going to dig us out or the truck was going to dig us out. I made sure that we were all belted in because I knew it was going to be kind of hairy there for a second. And I put my truck down into 4 low and reversed it, and then essentially used every ounce of horsepower to claw my way back up to the crown of the road.
Back on the road, they continue their drive to Vail Medical Center. When they finally arrive, the trip has taken 6 hours.
We got to the hospital and everything was ready. The patient was in the operating room.
Dr. Campson recovers the liver and 2 kidneys as planned, but he and Rick can't relax yet.
At that point, we're on the clock to leave quickly because that's what's called cold ischemia time. At that point, those organs are dying.
Once again, it's up to Rick to drive them down the mountain safely. The trip from Denver took 6 hours, but for the organs to be viable, they'll have to make the return trip in 4.
The only thing that's going through my mind is I'm on a timeline. I have to get these organs back to these patients as soon as I can. And just white-knuckled it the rest of the way.
But the conditions have changed. While they were in surgery, a thick layer of ice has formed on the road, making driving even more dangerous.
As we started making it down Vail Pass, the ice was so bad that I was in the lowest gear trying to feather my brakes and slide the truck down the mountain. More or less a controlled, chaotic slide.
And as he drives, Rick's truck, battered from the drive to Vail and barely in control, is taking even more damage.
Frame took a lot of hits, and a lot of the components of the truck itself took a lot of damage, and I could hear all this occurring, and my gauges were starting to tell me that I'm starting to have, catastrophic failure. And I kind of looked at my gauges and gauged that I would get them there at all costs. I'd already gone this far and already taken this much heavy damage that this was important enough to where I had to make this trip no matter what.
Driving his vehicle to its limit, Rick manages to maneuver safely down the mountain.
I really didn't feel safe or comfortable until we'd hit the Denver city limits, where the roads really started to be cleared and there was a lot less snow.
From there, it's an easy drive on cleared roads to University of Colorado Hospital, where the transplant team is waiting.
Rick and I sort of shook hands, patted each other on the back, and then I went directly to the operating room. We were able to do 3 transplants, and everybody did well, so we were very happy at the end of the day.
Rick Adams and Dr. Campson's drive to Vail is enormously risky, but the results are immeasurable. They saved 3 lives. Gloria Kugler receives a desperately needed kidney.
When I woke up, it was different because I was actually already starting to feel better.
2 other patients who received Melissa's second kidney and her liver are also given a second chance. And Melissa's corneas are used to save another person's eyesight.
It was a heroic act, and I will be forever grateful for what they've done. But the heroes to me are Melissa, the donor, and her family that had the courage to follow through with the donation. And I would encourage everyone to be an organ donor. It is so important.
For the Weather Channel, I'm meteorologist Jim Cantori. Your local forecast is next.